Now when we say that Adhyatma means that which pertains to myself, a question can pop up immediately, and it usually comes up in spiritual circles, that then is Adhyatma selfish, is spirituality selfish? All the spiritual talks, all the discussions usually try to say that you should not be selfish, you should not think about yourself, you should become selfless, and all these things are usually said. So when we say Adhyatma is paying attention to yourself, it looks like a conflict, it looks like a contradiction. So the question arises then that is Adhyatma selfishness then? The short answer is yes, it is selfish. But if you look at it carefully, there is nothing that is not selfish. There cannot possibly be anything that you can do which is not selfish. Whatever you do is necessarily selfish only. We do yoga sadhana, we do adhyatmic sadhana for ourselves. We don't do sadhana for someone else's sake. Sadhana is also for our sake only. So yes, it is selfish. So the next question is then, how is it different than the usual meaning of selfishness? Is there any difference? This has been told in many different cultures in many different ways. There are fundamentally two facets to what we call as me, what we call as my nature. There are two contradicting facets to it. You can say it's contradicting, or you can say it is complementing. One side of you, one facet of you, always wants to preserve yourself. One facet of me always wants to preserve me. I want to protect me. I want to have a boundary, and I want to live within that boundary. This is usually called as survival instinct, the instinct of survival. That is one aspect of our nature, of what we are. The other facet is we don't like boundaries. We want to transcend those boundaries. We want to erase those boundaries and become limitless. So these two contradicting natures exist in us. One wants boundaries, another does not want boundaries. One wants to find comfort in living within those boundaries, within a shell. Another wants to break that shell and become free. And this has been expressed in different cultures in different ways. In Chinese culture, this was represented as yin and yang. In English, we today translate that as feminine and masculine. In yoga, we describe that in terms of gunas, tamas, rajas and sattva. Instead of 2, we have 3, which is more elaborate. And both these facets are needed, both the facets are necessary. The one that wants to protect itself, the one that wants to have a boundary, that nature actually pertains to our physicality. Physicality has a boundary, and physicality has to be defended, it has to be protected. But the mistake that happens is, this part of our nature which pertains to physicality is wrongly extended to all the other dimensions of what we are. It is extended to our mind, intellect, emotions, and we have unknowingly built walls there, made a shell, and we are trying to live within it. And another facet of us does not like it, it feels suffocating. So these contradicting aspects are very much visible in people. One part of them wants to expand and open up. Another part wants to constrict itself, constipate itself, live within that shell. So this struggle can be seen always in human beings. So now, when we look at that being selfish in the light of these two fundamentally different aspects of what we are, there can be selfishness in two different ways. So there is one side of me which wants to stand apart from everything else and assert its individuality. meaning have a boundary and assert the individuality. And there is another side to me which is contradicting, which says I don't like boundaries, I want to be free, which wants to merge into the rest. It doesn't like that division of me and the rest, and it wants to dissolve. So I can be selfish either in a way where I want to make myself exclusive, or I can be selfish in a way where I want to dissolve my exclusivity and I don't want to have boundaries. So if you look at it strictly, both are selfishness. In both cases, I want something to happen with me. For example, you look at the word sacrifice. Sacrifice is usually looked at as an act where a person voluntarily undergoes a loss, where he loses something, he gives up something for the sake of someone else. That's called sacrifice. But if you look at what actually happens in sacrifice, or for that matter, even if you look at dictionary, how dictionaries describe sacrifice, I don't remember the exact description, but it is something like this. It says sacrifice is something where a person gives up something valuable for the sake of something which he considers to be of more value. So, in the personal experience of that person, he is undergoing a gain, he is not undergoing a loss. In the eyes of someone else, it may look like a loss. For example, I may give up money for the sake of my mental peace. I am going after enhancing my experience of life. I have realized that mental peace is more important than money, and therefore I may decide to give up money for the sake of my mental peace. And people may say it is sacrifice and it is a great thing. But if you look at it subjectively, I am only going after enhancing the experience of my life. I am not going after losing. The net effect is that there is only a gain. Sacrifice involves only a gain. But the only thing is that when people give up gross things for the sake of subtler things, others do not understand it, and therefore it may look like a loss to others. But in my experience, losing that gross thing and gaining a subtle aspect, it enhanced my life, it made me more intense in my experience of life, something. So in my experience, there is only a gain. Sacrifice involves only a gain. So I am just making this point to point out that sacrificing is also selfish, in the sense I am going after more refined and sublime experience of life. I am trying to dissolve myself. Sacrifice is one way of dissolving the boundaries. Sacrifice is one way of opening your individuality up, and that enhances the experience of my life. And so, as far as I am concerned, I am only going after a gain. So you can say everything, whatever we do, is ultimately it is selfish. The only difference is whether I am being selfish to thicken my boundaries, to become a more stronger individual, or I am selfish intending to erase those boundaries gradually and dissolve. Now here, there can be a technical point. The point is that as long as I have a desire that I want to dissolve, that itself is an individual. There is somebody who wants to dissolve, and therefore dissolution will not happen. Yes, it is a valid point, and therefore yoga is always talked of as two halves. To put it very simply, to summarize it, what happens is, presently our attention and energy is scattered, meaning our desires are scattered. They are not focused at something specific. So the first half of yoga is to acknowledge that I am suffocating within these boundaries which I have created in my psychology. I am not liking this individuality. and acknowledging the other facet of my nature which wants to dissolve, which doesn't like boundaries. Eventually, all your energy, all your focus will come upon this one desire that I want to dissolve. When it happens, when it comes to that point, that desire is also given up. That is the second half of yoga. We cannot directly speak of from wherever we are presently. If we directly speak of a desireless state, a selfless state, it actually doesn't mean much. So from the present state, we can only strive, we can only put effort to enhance this longing, to acknowledge that part of us which doesn't like boundaries, which wants to dissolve. So in the first half of yoga, this striving is intensified, that I want to dissolve, I want to dissolve, I want to dissolve. When all your scattered energy and attention has come upon this one great longing, that is also dropped. So in our present state, where we are so scattered, if we directly speak about going to a state where the self is not, where I am not, it doesn't make much sense. So the first step is to kind of gather yourself. The first half of yoga is to gather yourself, and that is why so much emphasis is given on samadhi, ekagrata and all that concentration, bringing yourself together. So when whole of your being has been gathered into that one thing, the second half of yoga is giving that up, dropping that. Presently you are scattered into thousands of things. When you are all over the place, the self cannot be dropped, it cannot dissolve like that. First it has to gather into one place, and only then it can dissolve. Like they used to give simple metaphors for this. They used to say that only if all the dried leaves have come together, and only if you have made a heap out of it, there will be a big fire. All of them will burn. Otherwise, if the leaves are all scattered across the ground, even if you give fire to one of the leaves, all of them will not burn. All of them will continue to exist. So the first step is to gather all the leaves, meaning presently whatever I call as myself is all scattered into hundreds of various identities, identifications with so many things. And so the very first thing to do is gather yourself into one great longing that I want to dissolve. So when that happens, that is selfish. That is extremely selfish. And when it is dropped, then you can say it is selfless. Let's not go into it. That is all beyond words and all that. We don't have to describe it anyway. We can only describe what we can do. But yes, because selfishness can have these two facets, a spiritual seeker also may mistakenly, his selfishness of intending to dissolve may sometimes without his knowledge become selfishness in a way which makes him more constricted and aggressive and whatever he was doing with the world earlier, however he was thickening his walls and boundaries, what he was doing in the world earlier, unconsciously he may do the same thing when he comes to spirituality also. That's very much possible. So instead of being selfish in a way which will dissolve him, he may become selfish in a way which will constipate him, just like his worldly identities. Just as your worldly identities can be pricked, your identification in the spiritual field also gets easily pricked, and people defend it and protect it. The same thing can happen there also. So a spiritual seeker should be always careful and should be always attentive to this, that I am selfish, yes, but in what way am I selfish? I am selfish, I am wanting to dissolve. I don't want to become more constipated. So this awareness should always remain in spiritual seekers, because otherwise the very things that they do in their spirituality in any path, in Jnana Yoga or Bhakti Yoga or whatever path it is, the individuality may become constipated there also. In Jnana Yoga, when people become more intellectual and when they read many things, the heap of knowledge may make them more constricted, feel more exclusive. Or in the path of Bhakti Yoga, when people go into this believing in God business, they may develop a superiority complex over people who don't believe in God. All this is possible. In Bhakti Yoga, the only thing is it is a way of melting yourself away using God. But people may, very much possible that they make themselves more aggressive in the name of God itself. We see it all over the place. So God, instead of making the experience of their life sublime means which dissolves their boundaries and which gives them an elevating experience, it can thicken their boundaries and make them more exclusive. For if you ask Adhyatma whether it is selfish, yes, it is selfish. There is nothing that you can do that is not selfish. Whatever you do is selfish. But there are two fundamental natures to you. One that wants to have boundaries, another that doesn't want to have boundaries. So you can be selfish in a way to strengthen your boundaries further, or you can be selfish in a way saying that I want to dissolve my boundaries. Both are selfishness.